Hello and welcome to East Kent Schools Together's creative collaboration, Our Shared Isolation. I'm Esther Miles, the artist in residence for East Kent Schools Together. Thank you so much to everybody that sent in their pictures last week and the week before. Here are a few that I didn't manage to squeeze in last week of the Frida Kahlo and Queen Elizabeth portraits. And here are your wonderful responses to the second worksheet. I just love all of the different symbols that you've picked and how imaginative you've been with it. Well done. Thank you so much for sending in all of those. It's been really lovely to get to know you all a little bit better through them. I can't wait to see them in your final portraits. So last week I spoke to you a little bit about how symbolism can convey a message in portraiture. This week I thought it might be useful for us to hear from some living portrait artists about how they evoke a sense of mood and atmosphere through technical methodology such as pose, colour and lighting. I've spoken to 3 very different portrait artists who all achieve their results in very different ways. Now, all of the interviews were so interesting that they went on for quite a long time, so unfortunately I've had to cut them down to fit into our allotted time. But I really hope that you find them as interesting and as helpful as I did. The first artist I spoke to was Dai Griffiths. Mr. Griffiths was my art teacher, and because of this I know how good he is with colour. In this video he's going to talk to us about how he created his painting called Serenity, of a mutual friend of ours. Dai has painted Noreen a number of times. I asked him about the inspiration behind this particular painting.
Whilst on holiday at Noreen's house in France, we spent this particular day reading in her front room. It was bathed in light, and Noreen, for an instant, was miles away looking out of the window. The contrast of her skin tones and the black of her cardigan contrasted the brightness of the interior. I quickly grabbed my camera and took a few shots of the scene, capturing the transitory effects of those moments. This painting then was developed from one of those pictures. Capturing the moment, the angle, the light, the composition are all important in my work. Other emotions develop through the process of painting. Having selected my image, I cropped the photograph so that only Noreen was in the frame. She was sitting on her foot at the time, which looked a little incongruous or inappropriate, and so I decided to not to include it in the final painting. As there was so much white in the painting, I decided to warm up the painting by using an orange ground. So I painted the whole canvas an bright orange colour. I then drew a square grid over the photograph, and using an enlarged grid drawn upon my painting, I started to map in the main proportions. I drew this with a brush using a dark blue colour, which is complementary to orange. I never use black in my paintings, and therefore mixing complementary colours for me is essential. To get black, I use a mixture of red plus green and blue or purple. I might use a little bit of lamp black to get the tone even darker. If you use black straight from the tube, it will flatten your painting. The orange background burns through the thin applications of white and warms the white. Due to the shadows being cast, white can vary from a red orange grey colour to a blue purple grey or a yellow grey, depending on the adjacent colours or other colours reflecting in the room. The wall at the back of the picture is a mixture of blue, white and a tinge of orange to make a blue-grey, and allowing the canvas colour to come through in places. Where it is lighter, I added some more white. The light outside the window is a combination of blue and white, letting the orange background burn through once again. The back of the settee is a mixture of purple and white, blue and white, and again letting the background burn through in places. Noreen's dress has a series of folds which I painted using mixtures of blue, white and purple, and again letting the orange burn through in places. The shadow down her leg is painted with mixtures of purple and yellow. Be careful with your highlights. Make them light white blue or white purple rather than just white. Noreen's face and hands are painted with mixtures of red and purple. Where the skin turns more brown, I mix a little green and purple to the red and orange, and a touch of white where it gets lighter. For the shadows, I use purple. As orange is a mixture of red and yellow, I choose the complementary colour, the opposite colour, which is purple. And with a light purple, I added her facial highlights. Noreen's cardigan is a mixture of ultramarine blue, a very strong dark blue, and crimson. Her hair is purple with dark blue made up of red, green and blue. Although I've been told that I have caught a sensitive and emotive pose in this picture, the thing that I felt most pleased about was making the cushion between her arm and her cardigan look as if the point is coming towards you. It's called foreshortening. This is a painting, like all my acrylic paintings, a tone poem using complementary colours.
A massive thank you to Dai Griffiths for all of that information. I found it so interesting that he was able to create such a pale and subtle image over this bright orange background, and can totally see now how that provided that grounding of warmth. My next interview was a Zoom call with Ben Anker. Now, as you know, Ben Anker is a portrait photographer, and he's also judging our competition and supplying our amazing prize. I wanted to talk to him because as a photographer, he has to deal with an element of chance and be quite spontaneous with it. I wondered how that affected the work. I asked Ben how this photo portrait of a Borough Market trader came about.
Well, every year I enter a portrait competition at the National Portrait Gallery, and for the shot for the Borough Market guy, which was taken maybe about 2 or 3 years ago now, that was a day just spent in London, just walking around the streets of London trying to find interesting people to photograph. Unfortunately, many people asked me to move on. But this guy, he was one of the traders at Borough Market, and absolutely everything about him that just wanted me to photograph him, from his coat to his shoes. And he was very charismatic, he was very friendly, he's very interested in what I was doing and why I was doing it. I mean, the location, obviously Borough Market's a beautiful place to be anyway. But again, I didn't want to have any distracting light to take away from the clothing, which I felt was the main part of the photograph. So obviously I stood him under a soft light, so that's just natural daylight coming in through to the roofs.
Oh really? There's no lighting going on at all?
There's no lighting in that one, no.
So you actually have to think on your feet quite a lot. If you're just going to London and literally touting, it's not like you can actually come with any preconceived ideas at all.
I have lots of ideas in my head, but quite often when it comes down to it, you don't get an opportunity to even think. My first commission when I left college was to photograph a CEO of a major company, and of course this was my first job for a magazine. So naturally I had all my kit with me. I had ideas coming out of my head left, right and centre, and I turned up at this guy's office. Now, being a CEO of a company, you would expect him to have nice offices and things like that, and lots of interesting things around. Unfortunately, because he's a CEO of a company, he's very rarely in his office, and so his office was completely sparse of any life, any interest at all. I turned up. He arrived and he said, "You've got 5 minutes, then I have to go." And so obviously, new, fresh out of college, panic stations, and literally I just had to, and I was shooting on film as well, so I didn't have a digital camera, so I couldn't see what I was actually really getting until I had the film exposed. And so that experience set me up for life as a photographer, because you, as much as you can plan things, you're completely reliant on the location you go to, if it's on location, the weather, the mood of the person you're photographing. They might be in a foul mood and not be interested in what you're doing at all. You have to learn to adapt to these extraordinary situations.
Do you find that part an exciting part of the process, or is it something you hate?
It's frustrating at times, because you do go with ideas, and you do want to produce the best piece of work you can for your client. But at the end of the day, you know, you've got to use your experience to adjust very, very quickly to the circumstances that you're in.
I mean, obviously you are able to do that very effectively, because it's worked very well in this shoot. You're just thinking on your feet and coming up with this thing, but I guess there's an element of luck that you found this character. So did you have to scout around for that location, or was that just literally right near where he was based?
To be honest with you, yes. I mean, that was literally 5 yards from where I found him. So that was fine. The light was great. It was, it was perfect light for the shoot.
Do you have to do a lot of work on Photoshop after the shoot is taken? I mean, the colours, for example, are so well tied in with him.
With respect to colours and things afterwards, very, very little. You know, I may have tweaked, you know, maybe some blacks a little bit, just to bring out, just to bring a little bit more contrast into the shot. But apart from that, very, very little work.
Do you think this picture has a message?
He was a very deadpan character. He was very keen to sort of like make sure that, you know, he was looking exactly how he wanted to look. But when it came to any expressions, I didn't want anything to detract from the clothing. So I didn't want him smiling, really. And, you know, I didn't want in any kind of bizarre angle or pose. I just wanted it straight on, flat, and just him just staring into the camera, because I wanted the eyes to be drawn to what he was wearing, because I think that was the most interesting thing about that. And it was that kind of London character that I wanted to try and portray in the shot.
One of the things I really enjoy about looking at your photos is that it's the questions, like,
right,
what's the story there? Who's that guy? It's enjoyable as a viewer to wonder.
To think about it for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Part of the joy of your photography is it's an invitation almost to use your imagination and create stories about these characters you've presented us with.
I found that conversation to be such a fascinating insight into what it is to be a portrait photographer. It's so interesting to hear how chance elements such as the light or the weather or happening to find the right person can really impact a piece. It was also really good to hear how his experience as a young photographer really set him up to be open to the unexpected. It's very inspiring to know that you can make really great work quite spontaneously. Our final interview is with the wonderful Mark Pulsford. Mark is a draftsman and a painter of enormous versatility. He's as much a landscape painter as he is a portrait painter. I spoke with him about how his wealth of experience and knowledge of art history contributed to his portraiture. Amongst other portraits, today we're talking about this beautiful oil painting of Noah, who is a relative of one of his adult students. I began by asking Mark how he uses different media when he prepares for a painting.
I mean, the three versions of Noah, one is in ink, with a quill, and one is in this sanguine chalk, and one is in oil paint, which is done on a black background, and it's painted in coloured oil paints. It's a lovely thing to do, to draw using light tones against dark, which is the very opposite of what one usually does.
It actually brings this amazing vibrancy, I think, to the painting, and it kind of it gives it life, doesn't it? I have been trying to reiterate the fact of observation and repetition being your greatest thing in your toolbox, really. It's like learning the language almost, so that you can apply it in a beautiful way.
The thing that I discovered 9 months ago when I was doing the John Martin drawings, he was a musician who died 10 years previously, but I had a wealth of digital information. Obviously, he'd been a public performer from the age of 18 until when he died, he was 60. And so there was a massive amount of stills, publicity stills, family photographs, and moving images, so that, you know, I had a film I could stop motion and I could move it on 5 seconds and get another one. And it was a wonderful way of doing it. I produced many dozens or scores or even hundreds of studies. It's a difficult sort of bridge to cross, but once you're there, it really works. If you're prepared to apply yourself literally hundreds of times, we're still with the same excitement and vitality over and over and over again, you achieve a knowledge of whatever your subject is. It works. You know, the people that I've drawn, you know, hundreds of times, they became suddenly the things that I was the master of.
I asked Mark if he had any preconceived ideas of how he wanted his painting of Noah to look, and if there were any outside influences on this.
You know those sculptural portraits of Akhenaten's Queen Nefertiti? They used to elongate the skulls of the Egyptian aristocracy in the sort of 3rd millennia BC, and they looked sort of ethereal, like gods. They were supposed to look like gods, not people, you know. And I saw Noah a little like that. There was almost a temptation to say, well, I'm going to make you look like my memory of this sepulchral sculpture from the Valley of the Kings. Now, that would have been wrong. That would have been a wrong motivation. So I wanted to absorb that beyond that impression, dealing with the real living young woman.
My favourite things in the whole painting are the scarf and this curl of hair coming forward. It's so beautifully, quickly and vibrantly put. I also love your the use of contrast and colour, and the fact that you've picked out the shadow with green, and that contrasts so well with the redness of the scarf, and is really unusual and does kind of give her this luminosity.
It's an interesting thing about skin tone. You're not talking about the intrinsic coloration, pigmentation of the skin. You're far more important is the colour of the light.
That was a wonderful conversation with Mark. It really highlighted to me the importance of getting to know your subject really well. He obviously does this by making a lot of studies in a variety of media. All of this experimentation and knowledge really adds to your artistic toolkit. As a final question to all of our artists, I asked them to provide one symbol that would encapsulate their experience of lockdown. Here are their answers.
Being a painter, I was made for lockdown. I have a studio at the bottom of my garden, which is very much my sanctuary. It's a place for meditation and reflection. So for my memory of lockdown, I would do a painting of the interior of my studio, the place where I spend most of my time.
Well, mine would be, due to the fact that I'm a portrait photographer and lockdown has meant that I've not been able to get out and do as much photography as I would have liked to have done. I've gone back to my days at art college and started painting. And so my object would be my palette knife.
Ah, lovely.
I've chosen a stone for various reasons. One of the reasons is because I'm constantly on the beach here in Sussex, picking up stones. I know that picking up stones will always remind me of lockdown. But the other thing was, do you remember a few months ago, somebody made an installation of a big metal sculpture. They were called the monoliths, and they were all made out of metal.
Yes.
And that irritated me, because monolith is a single stone. You know, linguistically, that's what it means. Yeah. Monolith.
Of course it is.
Yeah. And so I was annoyed by this, so I brought a monolith.
Oh wow, that is that's huge, Mark. Oh, isn't that beautiful? Look at all those holes. How did you get that home?
Thank you to all of our artists for giving me so much of your time. I think all of those conversations have really driven home to me the importance of colour, lighting and pose. Dai's recline pose really set the tone for that serene atmosphere, whilst Ben's full frontal pose of his market trader had quite the opposite effect. Mark's profile pose of Noah gave a nod to those sepulchral Egyptian sculptures. I'd like you to think about all of these things when you're completing your next worksheet. Your task this week is finally to make some self-portrait studies. Like Mark Pulsford, I really want to get you to know your subject very well, and of course your subject is you. So I'd like you to make quite a few studies in as many different ways as you can think of. You can experiment with different poses. You don't have to be a perfectionist about this. They can be really quick studies. In these, I've tried to keep my eye forward, but I've experimented with angles and used quite a hard light to create a dramatic effect. It's a really good idea to play around with medium at this stage. It can make you a much more versatile artist, and you might discover a medium that really works for you. Different mediums have very different effects on your picture. With their limited scope for shading, pen studies can provide quite a stark, sometimes intimidating look, while this colour pencil study is quite soft despite the hard light source. There are lots of different ways of making a self-portrait. I would like you to try doing it the old-fashioned way by just looking in a mirror. What this can do is make you have a really hard and honest look at yourself. It might not be the most perfect copy, but you're likely to make some very interesting marks and capture something that you wouldn't if you were just copying a photograph. If you're a bit daunted by drawing your whole face, you could just pick one feature to start with. As well as your mirror study, you're absolutely welcome to try taking a photo of yourself and making a portrait from that. There are some things to remember though. Don't try and make yourself look perfect. We heard from both Ben and Mark that it's people's imperfections that actually produce the most beautiful work. We probably have all struggled with self-confidence about the way we look at some point, but making honest studies of yourself is actually a really good way to get to know and like some of the bits you're not sure about. Another interesting one is to keep your mouth closed. Whilst having your teeth out in a photo can look quite normal, in portraiture it can often look a little bit staged. This is because sitters rarely sit for long periods of time with their mouth open. Take a really clear photo in really good light. All of our artists have spoken to us about how important surrounding light and colour is, as it is reflected in your complexion. You can try using a drawing grid. If you ask your parents if you can search drawing grid on your phone, there are lots of good free apps. We saw Dai Griffiths using this technique on his painting of Noreen. What this does is break up your picture into more manageable chunks and can really help with perspective. You might want to play around with perspective and make something that is not completely photo accurate. Lots of artists do this by elongating the neck or the nose, and that's completely up to you. That would be wonderful if you want to do that. You'll be given a worksheet to remind you about all of this, but do contact me if you have any questions. As always, I'd love to see any images you might have. Do send me an email with those if you like. Good luck with your worksheets. I cannot wait to see them. Goodbye.